The wind, a razor, scraped at the cobblestones, and the snow, a relentless shroud, muffled all sound but the frantic thump of Edmund Hale's heart. He could feel her, even through the swirling white. A chill, deeper than the biting air, settled in his bones. She was watching, always watching. It began subtly, a shadow at the edge of his vision as he navigated the frozen lanes of London. A figure, cloaked and hooded, always too far to discern, yet undeniably present. At first, he dismissed it as paranoia, the product of a lonely winter and a mind prone to fanciful anxieties. Edmund Hale, a humble clockmaker, was not the sort to attract such attention, but the incidents escalated. A single crimson rose, frozen solid, left on his doorstep. Footprints, small and delicate, leading to his workshop window, then vanishing as if swept away by a sudden gust. A whisper, carried on the wind, a name he couldn't quite decipher, a name that sounded like a sigh, haunted him. The snow, usually a beautiful, if inconvenient, aspect of the season, became his enemy. It held her tracks, those delicate imprints that seemed to appear and disappear at will, but they were not entirely human, too light, too precise, as if left by something that barely touched the ground. One night, as Edmund worked late, the warmth of his workshop a fragile bubble against the encroaching cold, he heard a tapping at the window. Not the frantic scratching of a branch, but a deliberate, rhythmic tap. He held his breath, the ticking of his clock suddenly deafening. A face, pale and ethereal, appeared in the frosted glass. Her wide, dark eyes burned with an intensity that made his blood run cold. They were not the eyes of a woman, but of something from a bygone time, something hungry. She was beautiful, but not in any mortal sense. Her skin was the color of moonlight on snow, her hair a cascade of raven black, swirling around her like a living shadow. But her beauty was a mask, a deceptive veneer hiding something far more sinister. She tapped again, slow and deliberate, her lips forming a word, or perhaps a name. Alara. The window rattled, frost spiderwebbing across the glass. She was trying to get in. Edmund scrambled back, knocking over a half-finished clock, gears scattering across the floor like panicked insects. His hands closed around the nearest tools, a hammer, a chisel, anything that could serve as a weapon. But he knew, deep down, these were useless against her. She was not flesh and blood. She was something else, something that moved between the shadows, something that fed on fear. He fled, bursting into the snow-laden street, the wind whipping at his coat. He ran blindly, his breath catching in his throat, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the storm. He looked back, and she was there. Gliding through the drifts, her feet barely touching the ground. She moved with an unnatural grace, her cloak billowing around her like a dark cloud. He stumbled, falling into a snowbank, the cold seeping into his bones. He looked up, and she was standing over him, her face bathed in pale moonlight. She leaned down, her breath cold against his cheek. "Edmund," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of frozen leaves. "You cannot escape me. You are mine." Her hand, cold as ice, brushed his face. A wave of icy dread washed over him, and his consciousness began to slip. The last thing he saw was her smile, a cruel, triumphant curve of her lips, as the snow swirled around them, burying him in its cold embrace. The snow, his enemy, had become his tomb. And Alara, the phantom stalker, his eternal companion. The wind howled like a banshee, whipping through the trees and driving icy daggers into my face. I huddled deeper into my tent, the thin canvas offering little protection against the relentless blizzard. Snow piled up against the walls, threatening to bury me completely. I had been foolish to venture into the wilderness alone, especially in the dead of winter. But the solitude, the peace, the chance to escape the noise and chaos of the city had been too tempting to resist. Now, I regretted my decision. The storm raged on, and fear gnawed at my gut. I had no way to signal for help, and my supplies were dwindling. Food would last a few more days, but the cold was seeping into my bones, and I wasn't sure I'd survive the night. Hours passed, and the blizzard showed no sign of letting up. Just as despair started to set in, I heard a sound, a faint tapping on the tent wall. My breath hitched. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. Who could be out there in this weather? The tapping came again, louder this time. Swallowing hard, I reached for my flashlight and cautiously unzipped the tent flap. The wind nearly wrenched it from my hands, but I held firm. Peering into the blinding snow, I saw a figure standing a few feet away, A man, tall and broad-shouldered, bundled in a thick parka with a fur-lined hood. His face was obscured by shadow, but his eyes, they glowed like embers in the darkness. I hesitated. Was he lost? A stranded hiker like me? Or something worse? But the thought of facing the storm alone was too terrifying to bear. "Hello," I called, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. The man didn't answer. He didn't move either. He just stood there, watching me. A chill crawled down my spine. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the tent. The wind snatched the words from my mouth, but I managed. "Are you okay?" The man nodded. His voice was low, muffled by his hood. "I'm fine, are you?" "Yeah," I replied. "Just worried about the storm." "It's a bad one," he said, his voice a slow rumble. "I've been caught in worse, but this is up there." I shivered. "I'm glad I'm not alone." He didn't respond. He just stood there, watching me with those burning eyes. Something was wrong. I turned toward my tent. "I'm gonna head back inside. It's freezing out here." The man didn't answer. He didn't move. I swallowed the growing unease and stepped inside, zipping the flap behind me. My fingers trembled as I switched off the flashlight and lay down, listening to the storm. Then, a sound behind me. I turned. The man was standing just outside the tent, his hood pushed back. The dim light revealed his face, pale and gaunt, eyes black and hollow, lips twisted in a cruel smile. I gasped. I turned to run, but it was too late. His hands clamped around my throat. I struggled, kicking and thrashing, but he was too strong. My vision blurred. The last thing I saw was his face, contorted into something inhuman. I woke up with a jolt, heart hammering. The storm still raged outside. I was in my tent, a dream. I exhaled, trying to steady my breath. It wasn't real. But as I lay there in the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I wasn't alone. Morning came. The storm had passed. Sunlight gleamed on the fresh snow, turning the forest into a frozen wonderland. Relief washed over me, but so did a lingering unease. I packed my tent, eager to leave. Then, just as I was shouldering my pack, movement on the ridge caught my eye. A figure stood there, watching me. The man. The one from my dream, the one with the black eyes and the cruel smile. I froze. My blood turned to ice. He was real. I turned and ran until I reached the highway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I never looked back. I don't know who or what that man was, but I know one thing for sure. I will never go camping alone again.